Chapter 15 of Ruth. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Cynthia Lyons. Ruth by Elizabeth Cleghorn Gaskell. Chapter 15. Mother and Child. "Here is a parcel for you, Ruth," said Miss Benson on the Tuesday morning. "For me?" said Ruth, all sorts of rushing thoughts and hopes filling her mind, and turning her dizzy with expectation. If it had been from him, the new-born resolutions would have had a hard struggle for existence. "It is directed Mrs Denbigh," said Miss Benson before giving it up. "It is in Mrs Bradshaw's handwriting." And, far more curious than Ruth, she awaited the untying of the close-knotted string. When the paper was opened, it displayed a whole piece of delicate cambric muslin, and there was a short note from Mrs Bradshaw to Ruth, saying her husband had wished her to send this muslin in aid of any preparations Mrs Denbigh might have to make. Ruth said nothing, but coloured up, and sat down again to her employment. "Very fine muslin indeed," said Miss Benson, feeling it, and holding it up against the light, with the air of a connoisseur. Yet all the time she was glancing at Ruth's grave face. The latter kept silence, and showed no wish to inspect her present further. At last she said in a low voice, "I suppose I may send it back again." "My dear child, send it back to Mr Bradshaw? You'd offend him for life, you may depend on it. He meant it as a mark of high favour." "What right had he to send it me?" asked Ruth, still in her quiet voice. "What right? Mr Bradshaw thinks I don't know exactly what you mean by right." Ruth was silent for a moment, and then said, "There are people to whom I love to feel that I owe gratitude which I cannot express, and had better not talk about. But I cannot see why a person whom I do not know should lay me under an obligation. Oh, don't say I must take this muslin, please, Miss Benson." What Miss Benson might have said if her brother had not just then entered the room, neither he nor any other person could tell; but she felt his presence was most opportune, and called him in as umpire. He had come hastily, for he had much to do; but he no sooner heard the case than he sat down, and tried to draw some more explicit declaration of her feeling from Ruth, who had remained silent during Miss Benson's explanation. "You would rather send this present back?" said he. "Yes," she answered softly. "Is it wrong?" "Why do you want to return it?" "Because I feel as if Mr Bradshaw had no right to offer it to me." Mr Benson was silent. "It's beautifully fine," said Miss Benson, still examining the piece. "You think that it is a right which must be earned?" "Yes," said she, after a minute's pause. "Don't you?" "I understand what you mean. It is a delight to have gifts made to you by those to whom you esteem and love, because then such gifts are merely to be considered as fringes to the garment, as inconsiderable additions to the mighty treasure of their affection, adding a grace, but no additional value, to what before was precious, and proceeding as naturally out of that as leaves bourgeon out upon the tree. But you feel it to be different when there is no regard for the giver to idealise the gift, when it simply takes its stand among your property as so much money's value. Is this it, Ruth?" "I think it is. I never reasoned why I felt as I did. I only knew that Mr Bradshaw's giving me a present hurt me, instead of making me glad." "Well, but there is another side of the case we have not looked at yet. We must think of that too. You know who said, 'Do unto others as ye would that they should do unto you.' Mr Bradshaw may not have had that in his mind when he desired his wife to send you this. He may have been self-seeking, and only anxious to gratify his love of patronising. That is the worst motive we can give him, and what would be no excuse for your thinking only of yourself, and returning his present." "But you would not have me pretend to be obliged?" asked Ruth. "No, I would not. I have often been similarly situated to you, Ruth. Mr Bradshaw has frequently opposed me on the points on which I feel the warmest, am the most earnestly convinced. He, no doubt, thinks me quixotic, and often speaks of me and to me with great contempt when he is angry. I suppose he has a little fit of penitence afterwards, or perhaps he thinks he can pay for ungracious speeches by a present. So, formerly, he invariably sent me something after these occasions. It was a time, of all others, to feel as you are doing now. But I became convinced it would be right to accept them, giving only the very cool thanks which I felt. This omission of all show of much gratitude had the best effect. The presents have much diminished, but if the gifts have lessened, the unjustifiable speeches have decreased in still greater proportion, and I am sure we respect each other more. Take this muslin, Ruth, for the reason I named, and thank him as your feelings prompt you. Overstrained expressions of gratitude always seem like an endeavour to place the receiver of these expressions in the position of debtor for future favours. But you won't fall into this error." Ruth listened to Mr Benson, but she had not yet fallen sufficiently into the tone of his mind to understand him fully. She only felt that he comprehended her better than Miss Benson, who once more tried to reconcile her to her present by calling her attention to the length and breadth thereof. "I will do what you wish me," she said, after a little pause of thoughtfulness. "May we talk of something else?" Mr Benson saw that his sister's frame of mind was not particularly congenial with Ruth's, any more than Ruth's was with Miss Benson's, and putting aside all thought of returning to the business which had appeared to him so important when he came to the room, but which principally related to himself, he remained above an hour in the parlour, interesting them on subjects far removed from the present, and left them at the end of that time soothed and calm. But the present gave a new current to Ruth's ideas. Her heart was as yet too sore to speak, but her mind was crowded with plans. She asked Sally to buy her, with the money produced by the sale of a ring or two, the coarsest linen, the homeliest dark blue print, and similar materials, on which she set busily to work to make clothes for herself, and as they were made she put them on, and as she put them on she gave a grace to each, which such homely material and simply shaping had never had before. Then the fine linen and delicate soft white muslin, which she had chosen in preference to more expensive articles of dress when Mr Bellingham had given her carte blanche in London, were cut into small garments, most daintily stitched and made ready for the little creature, for whom, in its white purity of soul, nothing could be too precious. The love which dictated this extreme simplicity and coarseness of attire was taken for stiff, hard economy by Mr Bradshaw when he deigned to observe it; and economy by itself, without any soul or spirit in it to make it living and holy, was a great merit in his eyes. Indeed, Ruth altogether found favour with him. Her quiet manner, subdued by an internal consciousness of a deeper cause for sorrow than he was aware of, he interpreted into a very proper and becoming awe of him. He looked off from his own prayers to observe how well she attended to hers at chapel. When he came to any verse in the hymn relating to immortality,